Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Zach Eichenberger, Director of Marketing for Controlled Product Systems Group. And I have with me my co-host, Tim Nordstrom, Technical Sales and Training Manager. Thank you all for attending this educational opportunity brought to you again by CPSGU. It's been a little while since we hosted our last session. It is National Safety Awareness Month, so we thought it'd be prudent to host another session on UL and ASTM. So this is definitely one of our more popular sessions. Thank you for attending, and it's definitely time that we help our clients limit their liabilities and hopefully reduce some injuries, maybe even save a life, right? So we are recording this session. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, now would be the time to exit. We hope you don't, but I need to let you know that we are recording the session. You can share this with your cohorts at a later time if you so please. We are scheduled for 2 hours today. We have a lot of ground to cover. I think we've got a fairly intimate group here, but because of the size of the session, let's go ahead and keep your mics muted. Utilize the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Tim and I both will be monitoring that chat line, and we'll feed those questions to each other as it's appropriate. Both Tim and I have a passion for this topic. We've evangelized this message since 2000, when some of the more significant requirements entered the industry. Both of us train with the AFA at their schools and facilitate classes. And by the way, the AFA does a fantastic job educating on this topic, as well as other topics, including the IDA as well. They do a great job also. So we have a thorough curriculum for you. Some aspects will be left out just due to time constraints. We will try to signal what those items are as we go along. We could spend all day on this topic, and when we do some of that training with the AFA, we spend a whole day on these really two topics, but safety guidelines in general. So what we will do is give you an education and demonstrate a practical approach to satisfying the standards. We try to tee up actual situations that you might face in the field and offer recommendations as the industry is set forth, right? What we won't do is give you any legal advice. We're not suggesting how you run your company. It's not our intent at all. We're not lawyers. And in addition, we're not here to recommend manufacturer specific product. I might stray from that once here today, but again, this is meant to recommend, or it's not meant to recommend those products or discourage you from using them. They're purely examples in these images, by the way. The images used come from various sources. They don't come from a place of judgment either, by the way. Rather, they're being used as an educational opportunity. So obviously, we're going to show you some images where mistakes have been made. We're not judging those folks. Tim, did I miss anything from a disclaimer standpoint?
Nope, you nailed it.
All right, cool. If you want to go ahead and advance, I think it's also really important that we recognize and note some of that a lot of this content comes from the IDEA and ACI study guides. Those study guides are curated by these industry leaders, working to not only educate its members, but help shape industry standards. So it's important they be recognized and, quite frankly, applauded for their efforts and commitments to the industry. There are, as you see here, two main certification and accreditation organizations for gate automation, those being ACI Accreditation and Certification Institute, and the IDEA Institute of Door Dealer Education and Accreditation. I highly encourage everyone on this call to visit those websites, learn more about the certifications, look for an opportunity to participate, and we'll provide you some contact information in the post-webinar notes. I know that trade shows are starting to kick back in, regional events are starting to kick back in. I know in September there's a couple shows, West Coast Fence Show, WASA in Vegas, West Coast Fence Show being in Reno, and I'm sure those ACI certifications are going to be available there as well. So with that, Tim is going to kick off the training with ASTM F2200. Tim.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Again, good morning, everyone. The fact that you're attending this webinar, I got to believe you all have sat through, similar seminars, webinars, trainings, what have you. And the fact that you're here continuing on this says a lot. I agree with Zach. I have a big, affinity for this standard. It has really developed our industry from a quote unquote backyard industry to, a legitimate industry. We have true safety standards in here. This industry has done a good job from day one. Injuries and deaths have always happened, but they have never been widespread like other industries. However, one death is one too many. Now, one serious injury is one too many. So these standards were created that we're going to talk about today to eliminate or to reduce as much as possible. You're never going to eliminate. If somebody can find a way to get hurt in an automatic gate, they can. Our job as professionals is to try to do the absolute safest job that we can. And these standards came along to help us on it. There's been a lot of controversy on these standards over the years, especially early on. It seems like there's been a tremendous adoption rate, though, since then, and people have realized that they're not going away, and they're not going away, and that they had better learn them and use them to their advantage. So with that, moving on, I am definitely here to talk in the first part about the ASTM standard. What are the two standards? Boil down really quick. UL325 talks about the gate operator and how the gate operator is installed and manufactured. ASTM, my portion, talks specifically about the gate that's going to be automated, how it's built, and how it's installed. So UL325 is the gate operator. ASTM F2200 is the gate itself. These two standards, they are separate standards, but they are intended to work together. There are a few gaps that needed to be bridged, and these two standards do it. There's also a few things where they don't necessarily 100% agree, and you'll see that on one or two sections between them, and we'll point them out when we get to them. But these two standards are here to work together. ASTM F2200, what is the number one goal? Why did this document get produced in our industry? It was to improve safety. We can always do better. We can always make our job site safe. In the old days of gate operators, I kind of jokingly, although it's not a joke, we referred to, get out of the way of our gate. If you get caught up in our gate, shame on you. Well, that was a different time. That's a bygone era. We now need to continue to build gates that offer property owners the security that they are expecting. But we've got to balance that with safety. We have to make these job sites safe and secure. One does not get to balance the other out. They have to work with each other. And we can do that. We definitely can do that. And it also to raise industry awareness. There's many people that do not understand that an automatic gate can seriously injure somebody. So, could be our end users. I never really was around an automatic gate when I was a kid. If I had been, I'd have been riding on that thing all day long. It's summertime right now. That would have been mine and my buddies' activities. And we know what can happen when that happens. People just don't understand. So making our job site safer, keeping the level expectation out of the product that they expect, and having everybody aware that while we are trying to protect the property, these things can do some harm. And these are the steps we want to take care of to mitigate that the best of our ability. And number one, this is my profession. And if you're on this call today, this is your profession. I work in the automatic gate operator industry, and I'm very proud of it. This is my profession. And I truly believe and feel, and I know Zach does the same way, that you as a professional really need to understand UL325, F2200, and be able to explain it to the layperson to the best that you can. Just like somebody else who values their profession. It's very important that we understand it to the best of our abilities The benefit that you get out of that is you are able to describe this to the detractors, to the people that say, I don't need that stuff. You know, that's just the money grab. When you know these two documents and know them well, people will buy into what you're saying. All right. Both of the standards are a voluntary standard in most cases. It's a legal thing, but it doesn't mean, since it's voluntary, that there's not compliance necessary. Voluntary means basically it's not a law. ASTM UL is not a law. These were created by our industry to make our industry safer. However, the one thing is, like Zach said, we're not attorneys, and I'm not, but I can pretty much guarantee you, if somebody gets hurt or seriously injured in an automatic gate, the first thing the attorneys are going to reach for is the UL and the F2200 documents, because they are used as the standard for our industry. This is the standard on how automatic gates are built, designed, and installed. So you will be held to these standards, even though they're quote unquote voluntary, if someone gets injured or killed. Just like we say, is the National Electrical Code law? No, but it's what electricians go by. That's the standard. If the gate operator, which I hope the ones you're putting in are UL325 listed, then the entire installation needs to be in compliance with UL and ASTM. We got to do it to the best of our ability. Hopefully we're all using UL325 listed, tested machines. There are some local codes that may require compliance with UL and ASTM. Is this going to be mostly verbiage? Yeah. Have I really heard of many, even few sites where some inspector, if you will, came out and said, hey, your photo beam's not at the right height, or the screening on your slide gate doesn't meet the 2 1/4 inches? No, because it doesn't matter. They're requiring compliance with it. One thing that I do see on a regular basis, just 2 days ago, I was helping a customer out with a big spec, and it was very clearly written in bold letters: job site will comply with UL325 and ASTM F2200. So I see that more and more and more. Again, does it mean somebody's actually going to come out with a clipboard and a hard hat and critique it? Probably not. Maybe that day will come someday. It's not really here today, but that does not mean it's voluntary. You are going to be held to it. Question we get a lot. Can I work on an automatic gate that doesn't meet the current standard? And it's kind of a yes and a no answer. It's yes if the gate and operator were installed prior to F2200, which came about in July 2002. We're getting further and further and further away from that. We're almost in July of 2021. But there are sites out there, no doubt, that are this old. And the answer is yes, you can still work on it. Be a great opportunity, though, to talk to the end user and explain to them, hey, man, this thing was put in 1999 and 2000, over 20 years ago. Things have changed our industry. First off, the job is probably tired and worn out, and you can still put a few more Band-Aids on it, but it's letting end users know that they have liability, especially commercial job sites, that there is liability. They had no idea that they had liability out there in the gateway to their parking lot. Letting them know that things have changed. Many of these people will want to entertain and hear what you have to say, especially in the grand scheme of things. The dollar amount is not that big compared to what serious injury or death will cost them. Any gates, automatic gates you're working on after July 2002 has to meet the standard at that time. And the big one is, if you replace the gate operator, then the entire job site must meet today's provisions of ASTM and UL325. So UPS, garbage truck, whoever, somebody runs over to gate operator and you decide we got to replace it. Well, if it's a slide gate, we got to make sure it's meeting the current screening requirements. We got to make sure rollers are covered and all the things we're going to go over here. The whole job site comes into effect. It's no longer just a simple operator swap out that was 20 plus years old.
Hey, Tim, just want to call it out. Hey, guys, if you want to ask a question, throw it in the chat feature. What Tim just talked about is probably one of the more discussed questions when we're doing these sessions live. Is like, what do I do when I walk up to that job site? I know this gate's out of compliance. All they want me to do is service that operator. I didn't install it. Can I work on it? Right. So we're going to go through some kind of best practices here, but just want to make sure that was super clear that it kind of follows the vintage of the installation, right? And Tim made the big point as well. When that operator gets swapped out, everything comes up along with it, including the gate construction.
So it's a great point, and I probably didn't do the best job of talking about documenting. In today's world, you cannot document enough. Let's face it, we are in the business of selling and servicing automatic gates. The intent of UL and ASTM was not to minimize our sales. Absolutely not. We want to sell more, we want to service, but we want to do it in a safer way. It's our job to let the property owners know that they have a device out there that potentially could cost them some liability. And we do that with documentation. We're not here to say, oh, you just need to replace the chain. Don't do that. Sell them a $25,000 new job. That's not the intent. The intent is to educate. And there may be times we have to do that. There may be times, but each job site has its own uniqueness. We have some photos coming up where, some of the things say, look, if we can fix this and fix that, it's great. Other ones will be like, I am touching this with a 10-foot pole until they update the whole job site. It's a case by case. Your company has to decide what works for them based on every unique job site. Where can you find information about ASTM? I get that all the time. Where can I find? And the easy answer is it's free. It's right in every automatic gate operator manual. The first 1 to 6 pages of every manual is everything we're telling you here. They put that in. There's a reason it's at the beginning, because you open up the book, that's what you have to see. The manual is a fantastic source, and it's also going to be the document that the attorneys will bring to the table when there's an injury death. Why did you not install it per the manual? DASMA.com. Fantastic resource for you. Please use it. They've got a ton of just very simple read technical data sheets that they target specific parts of F2200 that you can download, include in your proposal, send to end users. It helps explain maybe why your job site is more detailed, possibly more expensive than the next guy. But this is a great educational website, DASMA.com, and of course, ASTM.org. If you want to download the F2200 document, I think you can. I don't remember if F2200 has a cost. If it does, I think it's nominal.
Yeah, you can download it. I think I just bought one. I think it's around $50. It's copywritten, so when you buy it, you'll download it. It'll have your name on it. An update that I just recently found out as well, Tim, is many times in the past, folks have asked for the UL325 document. Mm-hmm. And now that's about 1 inch thick. It's really not very useful in most cases, because you've kind of it references different portions of the UL guidelines, but they recently have made that available online for view only. Now, if you want to buy it, I think it's like $900, but right. You could go in there and actually view it now. So we'll add that link in the post webinar notes.
Perfect. I highly recommend checking out DASMA and their technical data sheets. They really did a fantastic job of those for you and your customer. All right, let's jump into it. The F2200 standard was specifically written for vehicular gates that are intended to be automated, and it came into effect July 10th, 2002. That word intended is underlined on the screen. There's a reason for that. Everybody who touches this gate has some hand in the liability, and that includes, and the responsibility, I shouldn't just say liability, that includes a fabricator only. Say you work with a company that all they do, they build your gates. You're an automatic gate company. You don't design or you don't build anything, you automate it. So you work with ABC Gate Company, they build your slide swing gate, whatever it is, and they install it, then they walk away. You hook up all the wires, you hook up the gate operator, do anything. Well, ABC Gate Company is responsible equally for this gate just as much as you are if they know that it was intended to be automated. So if someone was to get hurt or injured, trust me, they will be called in. It is their responsibility. So if you work with fabricators, make sure that they have a good grip on this documents when they're building your gates, because they share in this. The document was basically meant to talk about slide swing, vertical lift pivot, vertical pivot, and overhead pivot gates. The five, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main gates that are out there. Today, we're going to focus on slide, swing, and vertical pivots because that's what makes up the vast bulk of our automatic gates. There are some other gates. We'll do a very brief mention on them. If you were able to come across a job site with those and want to talk, you can reach out to Zach and I. But we wanted to hit the stuff that you're going to see in your everyday travels. The first part of F2200, what it covers is the general requirements for any automatic gate. It doesn't matter slide, swing, vertical lift, vertical pivot. It does not matter what type of gate. Everything we're going to cover right now applies to any and all automatic gates. Number one is gates cannot fall over. If they do somehow fall over, they must be prevented from falling over more than 45 degrees. And yes, that includes swing gates. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get on the swing gate section. But a gate, when it's detached from its supporting hardware, swing gates hardware is hinges, slide gate maybe, cantilever rollers, V-track rollers, what have you. We can't have gates falling over. Believe it or not, people get injured, sometimes killed, in gates that fall over on top of them. Very bad. That's, again, all gates have to be prevented. And we'll get into the specifics on those. Another thing that's all gates, we cannot have any protrusions on the leading and trailing edge or the bottom of the gate greater than 1/2 of an inch and must be smoothed over. So no protrusions, leading edge of the gate or the bottom. Well, we got some pictures coming up next of what those, some examples of some of those protrusions, some of the common things that are done in the industry that actually violate ASTM. If we look at this slide here with these photos, I'm going to start with the easiest one, this far right here. There's a swing gate, very, very common, where we see the pickets extend past the bottom rail of the gate. Per ASTM, these are not allowed. They are more than 1/2 of an inch, and they're not smooth or rounded over. So how could we fix that gate? Well, I guess what we could do is come out with a grinder or some cutoff tool, cut everything off here. That's probably not the look they want. An easy way is to weld a piece of flat stock along the entire bottom of the gate, those pickets. We now just solve the problem. But per F2200, we don't want to build a gate with our pickets extending past the bottom of the gate. It's not allowed. This middle picture here, I think this is self-explanatory. Somebody has welded or attached these spear tips, if you will, to the face of the gate. And I know why they did it. They were tired of cars coming up, pushing on the gate and pushing it open. Completely understand, and I empathize with them. And I'm sure they solved the problem. I doubt there's many vehicles now pushing on this gate, but they have created just a massive problem for themselves. Somebody could just be walking by, kids goofing off. Somebody could easily get impaled on one of these. This is a horrible violation of ASTM F2200. We cannot do that. This is a job site here that if I pulled up on, we were kind of talking with Zach, is this one I could work on? This one here, I can address. This one, I don't know. I don't know if I could do that. Then lastly, this one over here. What the F2200 standard says is no protrusions on the leading, trailing, or bottom of the edge of the gate past 1/2 of an inch. Well, here, this is the edge of the gate. I've got this chain attachment bracket that is far past 1/2 of an inch. So what should have been done is this gate should have been built just a little bit longer to accommodate this bracket. That would have solved that problem. We would have never had this violation just in the design phase. In this case here, if it's already in and you've got to service it, a tail of some sort needs to be welded out past to increase the gate. And then we make this chain attachment bracket so it does not extend more than 1/2 of an inch past the gate. This is quite common, but believe it or not, this is a violation of F2200 and it's fixable. Fixable. This one, it has to be fixed. Did I see a question or anything come in or no? Just I saw blinky lights, so I got excited.
Yeah, there was a question. What would be the recommended minimum size of the tail?
That's a great question. F2200 doesn't give you that. For me, I think what the intent of UL325 is the tail, the intent would be the entire gate. If it's a 6-foot tall gate, then that gate would just be out 6 feet. I know that's not always reality. Sometimes you'll see a tail that's only 2 feet. You know, just kind of comes out and protrudes out. You know, you'd have to protect that. But in a perfect world, if we're designing this gate, let's just build the gate just a little bit longer so we don't even have to have that discussion.
Yeah, I'd agree. And Tim framed this out for me early in my career. You know, ASTM, UL, they don't necessarily care about your problems. They're not telling you how to fix these things. They're just telling you what you can't do for the most part. So what you can't do is have a protrusion, you know, more than 1/2 an inch and sharp.
I mean, it's actually quite simple. Can't have a protrusion. Just can't. One thing I want to say about UL and ASTM, they took an exhaustive approach to try very hard not to tell you how you have to build your gates. Everybody has their own creative artistry, how they want to do it. They worked very hard not to say, this is how you're going to do something. What they really tried to do is say, this is what you're not going to do. We can't have a protrusion. We can't have, you know, this or that. So there's a lot of times people say, why didn't they just say, do it this way? Well, because what works here may not work there. So just take that in mind. They're trying to give you complete control, as much complete control of your job site as they can with as little interference as they can.
Yeah, and I think it should also be noted that these standards were created by an ad hoc committee of industry professionals for that reason, right? They didn't want to say, make this so punitive that it was significantly disruptive to the industry. And so that ad hoc committee made sure that that was the case.
Great point. It was.
Go ahead.
No, you got it.
Well, while you're at it, Don, you asked a question, is there a maintenance checklist that we have access to for all requirements on safety? So there are some safety checklists out there. I'll try to filter those to you in the post-webinar notes. Although I will say there's still just general requirements that you're going to want to follow because, you know, every gate's different, right? That's the industry we work in. It's kind of challenging that way. That you're just going to have to apply the methodology to whatever type of gate you build.
100% right. If you walked up to a job site with this slide gate on the left, you know, one thing on your checklist, is there any protrusions on the leading, trailing, or bottom edge of the gate? And yes, there is. That'd be a checklist you would do. This front one, I don't even think you'd, or the middle one, excuse me, you'd even bring out the checklist. You'd just be leaving, you know, skid marks in the street, peeling away from it. And then, of course, the same thing over here. After you've gone through all the other things, the ULs and this and that, but it's up, I've got protrusions on the bottom gate. That would be the checklist that you would fill out on yours. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have protrusions. ASTM F2200 is very clear that we can still have protrusions out the top of the gate, decorative spear points, finials, whatever it is you want to put. Those are allowed. Those are have been shown to not cause nearly the injuries that the other protrusions off the leading, trailing, and bottom edges of the gates have shown. So still have complete control over what you put out the top of your gate. As soon as I say that, if we're going to talk about barbed wire and barbed tape, there is some restrictions. You know, obviously you're not going to see barbed wire and barbed tape too much on residential jobs, but certainly on commercial jobs. Barbed wire can't be installed less than 6 feet from grade. So I'll go out there on an extreme. You're having an automatic slide gate, swing gate, doesn't matter. Again, this is all gates put in, and it's only gonna be 4 feet tall. It's gonna reside 4 feet off of grade. You cannot put barbed wire on that gate unless you raise that barbed wire so that it is 6 feet from grade. The same with barbed tape, you know, razor ribbon, what have you, but it has to be 6 feet from grade. Got a good and a bad illustration or a photo.
8 feet, right, Tim?
What's that?
8 feet, right?
8 feet on, did I say the 6 on barbed wire and 8 on barbed tape? If this gate over here on the left side, God hope you don't automate that gate, but if you do, this barbed tape up here, if it's less than 8 feet off grade, it's got to come off, or you've got to raise the gate or what have you. This right picture here is perfect. Cantilever slide gate, barbed wire, it's greater than 6 feet from grade, perfectly allowed. This one here generally applies to what was once a manual gate is now going to be automated. And a lot of them had some type of mechanical latch. That latch has to be disabled, non-operational, once we automate this manual gate. And my favorite one, the one that causes the most controversy, nowhere in the F2200 document does it say that you cannot swing a gate uphill, that you can't slide a gate uphill. It does not use that verbiage. They were very careful on that. What it says is that, I'm going to read it here. I don't like to read PowerPoints, but the gate must be balanced so that it does not open or close on its own when disconnected from the gate operator. Read into that what you want to read into it. But if there wasn't a gate operator there, would this gate move on its own? If it does, that needs to be addressed before it be in compliance with F2200. Any questions on that one? I know that we have a tremendous, customer base that, lives in areas where gates are installed where they may move on their own. Okay, we're going to move on. Now we're going to shift. Everything we're talking about right now is specifically addressing slide gates. We'll go over every one of these points here. Rollers, they must be guarded. Any exposed rollers less than 8 feet from grade have to be covered. So if you're using cantilever rollers and they're less than 8 feet, all 4 of those wheels have to be guarded. There's plenty of commercially made, good quality roller covers out there. I live in an area where we don't do a lot of cantilever gates. I don't have tremendous experience with them. I know that there is some, negativity on roller covers out there, blah, 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 blah. I've also heard plenty of dealers say, no, they work pretty well. Like Zach said, F2200 doesn't care. If you've got an exposed roller less than 8 feet, it has to be covered. When we get to UL, we're going to talk about the classes, class 1, 2, 3, and 4. Class 4 being the least amount of operator installations out there, but there are some exceptions to all the rules when we talk about class 4. But for today's class, for everyday installations, rollers are going to be covered. That also applies to, any V-track gates, V-track wheels, guide rollers, all have to be covered. There's plenty of commercially available guide rollers, that come already covered. They're ready to go. There's many different manufacturers of them. Check them out. You can always build your own if you want, but in this case, I don't know why you do that. They're readily go. Wheel boxes, however you want to do it, just the wheel has to be covered. And of course, here's cantilever with all 4 wheels. We don't see the 4th one, but they're guarded as they should be. The one that probably everybody knows now, but is also mine, and I'm pretty sure Zach's top of the list, that no exceptions to this one be violated. Yes, sorry. Why does that? Picket spacing. All automatic slide gates must be designed so that a sphere greater than 2¼ inches cannot pass through the gate or the fence panel that it slides along from grade up to 6 feet. When this first came out in 2000, man, did I hear a lot of, hooting and hollering and blah, blah, blah. I see so much compliance with this now. People have said, yes, this is right. This has greatly reduced our injuries and deaths, just this, especially when we couple it with some of the other provisions of UL and ASTM. But simple fact is, gate has to be built and designed so that a 2¼ inch sphere can't pass through from grade to 6 feet, the entire gate and the fence that it slides against. Now, one thing that gets thrown out all the time that I don't like is like, well, I have to put mesh on the gate. No, the word mesh, I'm not even sure is even mentioned in the F2200 document. You do not have to put mesh on any gate. Mesh is just one of the ways you can have your gate comply with F2200. There's one of the ways. It's certainly an acceptable way, but it's not the only way. You can weld your pickets, closer together, what have you. But you do not have to put mesh. I've heard people say that, and I just want to make sure everyone understands that. You just have to comply with the 2¼ inch. Next picture here is someone that did a good and a bad job at the same time. They built the lower part of the gate in accordance with the 2¼ but they started opening it up well before the 6 feet. So looking at this, if I had my checklist, is the gate meet the 2¼ spacing requirements? And I'd have to say, no, it does not. How do I fix this job site? Well, I either add pickets in between each one of those, I put mesh, I put whatever it's going to take so that from grade to 6 feet up, that 2¼ inch sphere can't pass through. Couple more job site photos. This gate on the left here, very common gate. I've seen a ton of these, similar design, good looking design, but you can just see the picket spacing is in great violation of the 2¼ This is something that me personally, this is Tim's opinion, is if I had my own installation company, I'm not so sure I could work on this gate. This one is a big violation. Somebody could easily get tangled up in this gate. Something needs to be addressed with that right away. Over here, yes, sir.
That gate specifically scares the heck out of me. I mean, you'll see pickets all day that have, 4-inch spacing that violates it. We need to fix that. A gate like this is almost asking for some kid to try to slip through those pickets. And we know all too well that that's happened and killed kids before. Adult could probably slip through that. So that one scares the heck out of me.
Zach, couldn't agree more. Again, if that gate was around when I was a kid, that would have been a challenge to me and my buddies. Who can fit through? It's not a game. Someone can get really, really hurt. This gate here on the right, it's hard to see the gate actually out here. It looks like it probably adheres to the 2¼ but the F2200 document is very clear. It says the entire gate, the full gate. This part of the gate, which we call the back frame here, it does not meet the 2¼ Therefore, this gate is not in compliance. It's got to be the entire gate. Again, could I put mesh just on this back part? Sure. Whatever I got to do so that from grade to 6 feet up or the top of the gate, I meet the 2¼ That's all ASTM says. see a lot of similarities with numbers in UL and ASTM, which I really appreciate. They try not to throw too many different numbers at us. One that they say, and we're really going to focus on this in the UL section coming up, is this gap between the gate and some fixed stationary objects, which is traditionally a gate post. If that gap between the gate and that fixed object is greater than 2¼ inches, it must be reduced to 2¼ inches or less. Maybe that's welding in an ornamental iron picket or two, whatever it may be, but this gap can't be greater than 2¼ inches. Likewise, if I'm using, say, this pole over here for fall over protection, which is coming up in a minute, if it's within 16 inches of the gate, it's an entrapment, and I'd have to protect it. The better way to do that is to move it greater than 16 inches away, and per F2200, it is no longer an entrapment. So between 2¼ and 16 inches, I got to fill. If I'm less than or greater than, we're okay. I won't beat this up too bad. This is the front view, if you will, looking at the gate, the slide gate coming at us. We call this the draw-in post. This is the #1 spot where deaths and serious injuries occur. And we'll beat this up in about an hour or less. Just so you know, we'll really beat that up. That draw-in post is where we seriously harm people. Another picture of a gate here. This is a gate that's V-track, that's got a dual gate support. As long as the gaps between this gate and this post and this edge of the gate and this post is 2¼ inches or less, no problems. If it's more, something's got to be designed and put in to fill that gap. Let's say that gap was 3 inches, 4 inches, what have you. Maybe they could weld an ornamental iron picket coming off here that goes all the way up to the top of the gate. Up to you how to fill it. Such as this job site here. They left a gap that is greater than 2¼ inches, but less than 16. Therefore, this area here needs to be filled. How they fill it, it's up to you.
Important to note that this is the gap between those posts nearest the roadway as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to extend the whole length of the gate, but those gaps nearest the roadway.
Nearest the roadway. Good point. Thank you. Positive stops. I can't stress this enough, nor can F2200. Positive stops must be installed. How you do it is up to you, but so that the gate cannot over travel. Can't have a gate falling over due to over travel because we didn't put stops. Again, they don't have any recommendation on how to design the stops. I've seen them done countless ways, and every way that prevents the gate from over traveling is the right way, as long as we don't create a separate problem, which we're going to get to coming right up, is having something protruding into the lane. Positive stops, both open and close, are required on slide gates. Receiver guides. This is something that's used quite extensively on automatic slide gates. You might call it a retainer, receiver guide, yoke, whatever have you. If you're going to use, I'm going to call it a receiver guide because that's what F2200 does. A receiver guide, it cannot project into the gate opening unless it's greater than 8 feet off the ground. If it's less than 8 feet off the ground, then it must be recessed behind the post or the fixed object or whatever, and the gate can then slide into that. We cannot have that out in the opening. Many, many people have been harmed because of that. And I got some pictures here. So it's really clear. It's got to be behind if it's less than 8 feet. 3 pictures here. This one over here, I've seen gates like this. This is a disaster waiting to happen. We're ready to impale somebody on either side of this gate. I've shown this in the past and people say, yeah, well, it's their own fault if they fall into that. No, that's not the case anymore. People can be distracted. They have no clue about this automatic. They're looking at their phone, the dog runs at them, whatever. Before they know it, that gate forces them right into that. We have a serious injury. Over here is a very common installation. Slides into a gate receiver here, but it's projected into the driveway opening. We've got to recess it behind that post if it's less than 8 feet off of grade. all done in the design phase. Most of this stuff, I have a contemporary of mine that works out of Memphis, Tennessee area, and he says 90% of gate entrapments can be eliminated in the design phase. And I agree with him. In the design phase. If you have a dual or biparting or primary, secondary slide gate where we have two gates that come together and meet in the middle, and one of the gate panels wants to have a gate receiver on it, you want to have that gate receiver, that is fine. But if it's going to be installed, again, less than 8 feet, it has to be designed so that the front edges, leading edges of it, measure out to 9 square inches. Basically what they want is they want a hunk of metal out there, or a hunk of material, I should say, that easily identified and less chance of impaling somebody. So if you do a dual receiver, a biparting gate with a receiver guide on one of the leaves, 9 square inches on his leading edge, or mounted 8 feet or taller off the grade. Fall over protection. All gates, including slide gates, cannot fall over more than 45 degrees when they come loose of the gate operator. That's where the document stops. How you want to design that, there's countless ways to do that. These are just some illustrations here of ways to do it. Excuse me, they're not the only ways. They're just certain ways to do it. Gates can't fall over more than 45 degrees. Cannot have that. This photograph here was over in the UK. Obviously, this gate didn't have 2 things it was supposed to have. One was positive stops, and 2, fall over protection. I do believe, I think, Zach, you got the history on this. I believe a child or somebody in the UK, this gate fell on them and seriously hurt them.
Yeah, I think it was a older lady. But
Okay.
To your point earlier, this might have had fall over protection, but it lacked the positive stops, right? So it just slid right past it. Not sure the exact situation here.
Right. Either way, that gate fell over and it can't fall over.
And this is just a good best practice, whether it's automated or not, right?
Absolutely. So that takes us through definitely a lot of the meat of slide gates. We're going to move on to F2200 swing gates next. Is there any questions at this point we need to answer?
No questions coming through at the moment.
Okay, move on to swing gates here. Swing gates by their nature are safer than slide gates. It doesn't mean that people don't get hurt on them. Trust me, they do. But just by their nature, they are safer, and they don't have quite the restrictions that a slide gate does. They have a couple of things that they're very, very adamant about, and that's what we're going to cover here. This one right here. Again, this is one of those design phase things where you could eliminate an entrapment. But what F2200 says, that if you have if you have 4 inches or greater from the center of your hinge to the edge of your post, column, whatever, you have created an entrapment. They're not saying you can't do it, but if it's greater than 4 inches from here to here, a person can become entrapped right here. And you would have to protect that. How do I protect it? Well, maybe it's a gate edge, maybe it's a photo beam. We'll learn about those in UL. The fact of the matter is there's an entrapment that needs to be addressed. In the design phase, we can build whatever column we want. Build this beautiful 6-foot rock column, imported stone from Italy. I don't care. But if we can move that gate post or the gate attachment to the rear of the column to less than 4 inches, we have no entrapment. We have solved a problem that didn't need to be there. So we can hang our gates in the center. There is no, F2200 does not say you can't hang your gates in the center. They're not saying you have to move it to the end. What they're saying is if you have 4 inches or more, you have an entrapment that has to be protected. Just like this photograph here, brick column. And we're going to have definitely more than 4 inches from the center of this hinge to the edge of that column. This is a legal installation, it's not a compliant installation. There is no protection here where this gate swings. So what can we do? We pull up to this job site, what we do, we can recommend, maybe we'll put a gate edge, top of the gate to the body, mount it to that brick wall, hardwired over to the operator. That gate hits somebody and that somebody hits the edge, the gate will respond appropriately. Maybe you shoot a photo beam. Maybe you rehang the gate. That's probably the most expensive option. Those are all options. The second part of swing gates that they talk about is if in the open position, that swing gate comes in contact within 16 inches of a fixed object. Fixed object can be a wall, a fence line, who knows what. But if that gate in the open position comes within that fixed object within 16 inches, that is considered an entrapment area and we have to protect it. Most commonly, and again, we'll see in UL, the way we protect it is we shoot a photo beam the entire length of the gate. That way, if somebody is standing here and the gate's given an open command, it won't do anything, or as the gate is opening and somebody gets back here, breaks that beam, the gate will respond and hopefully not hit them, reverse back the other way. So 4 inches, 16 inches. Those are the magic numbers on swing gates.
And
Let's
Tim,
face it. What?
Sorry, I feel like this verbiage just never really got updated as life went on. And for some reason, they kind of call out this open position, but really it's from any position, right? If that gate's closing or opening within 16 inches, you have an entrapment zone. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah, like, well, we don't see the whole gate, but let's say this is the gate here and there's a post right here that it closes up against. That's an entrapment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think probably what the authors of this did said, well, that one's evident, right? Everyone knows that, this one over here, they had to pick a number, but 100% right. But, looking at that, let's veer off real quick. Let's say, I got this gate here. There is no wall. There's no fixed. I got an open field here. And I got an open field here. There's no post. I don't have an entrapment. But UL will say, well, yeah, you do. You got to address one of them. So we'll see that.
Yep.
Here's just an illustration. Again, reason we chose these photos, we don't want to say you cannot open a gate or close a gate up against an object less than 16 inches. Of course you can. That's going to happen. You just have to protect it. In this case, they've mounted a photo beam. That photo beam, if somebody was to break that beam, that gate would respond, hopefully before somebody got hurt. So we can do these. I mean, in this job site here, I doubt they had any room. There's no design phase here that they could have done. This one had to happen this way. Other job sites, we might be able to design so that we exceed 16 inches and we don't have that entrapment. This is another one of my favorites that I'm sure everybody on this panel does religiously. Swing gates fall under the fall over protection. And I'm joking somewhat. It's not meant to joke, but you gotta, some things you have to look at and say, okay, how many people are meeting this one? And I would say very, very few. But F2200 says the gate's detached from its supporting hardware, most cases the hinge, gate can't fall over. Again, F2200 does not say this is how you prevent that. These are just illustrations here of ways to do it. I don't see this happen too often, probably violated more times than not, but just pointing out, F2200 says, yep, got to do that, got to address that. One of the nice things about F2200 is there is no picket spacing required, no reach through, if you will, requirements on a swing gate. Due to the nature of how they work, they're swinging either towards you, away from you. There's no shearing action like a slide gate that if you're reaching through and the gate goes open, it's going to pull you in. If you were reaching through this gate here and the gate started moving, you can move with it. So you are free. In class 4, again, talk more about, you can do a lot more flexibility. But you are free on a swing gate to orientate your pickets or lack of pickets in any way you want. Again, still can't have protrusions, things like that. But if I want to have my pickets 24 inches on center, 36 on center, whatever design I want, that's perfectly allowed in the swing gate. Not allowed on the slide gate, but certainly allowed on the swing gate. I can have varying degrees, like I have here. I got pickets that are closer, which here they open up. This would not be allowed on a slide gate, certainly allowed on the swing.
Hey, Tim, if I could maybe just point something out, and the group's probably picking up on this, but there's really 3 measurements that you've talked about so far: 2 1/4, 4 inches, and 16 inches, right? There's another one that I want you to remember in UL, and that's 6 feet. But they did a pretty good job of staying consistent here. And you might also notice that 2 1/4 measurement, it's going to come into play when there's shearing action, right? If there's shearing action, we want to bring those reach through areas down even further, because that represents an opportunity for injury or death in a bigger way, right? And 4 inches is more, maybe this way, not really shearing, but we still have a possible entrapment area. So just remember those 3 measurements: 2 1/4, 16, 2 1/4, 4 inches, and 16 inches.
Yep, I think they did a good job and took some time with them over the years to really narrow that down. Yep. Well, that's a good segue, if you will, to the next type of gate here, which is the vertical pivot gate. For those of you that do them, you know what they are. For those of you who've never seen one, it's basically a gate that pivots like your elbow. Starts with the gate in the closed position, then has a central pivot point and pivots straight up to the sky. This one has many of the requirements of a slide gate because of exactly what Zach just mentioned, the shearing action, if you will. Here's a picture of that gate. You can only imagine that these people here have done they've done a good job, not a great job, but a good job. They put this mesh on the gate. The one difference, if I can point out, between a vertical pivot and a slide. The similarity is I have to make sure that I don't have an opening greater than 2 1/4 inches from grade to 6 feet up on anywhere that this gate passes by a fixed object. Most installations, what you're going to have, of course, is the gate, and you'll have some type of a fencing material that is in parallel here with the gate operator. The last thing they've done a good job. They put some type of solid material, maybe sheet metal here on there. What they didn't do, though, is finish it all the way up 6 feet up. But just imagine if there was nothing on here. There's no screening on the gate, and there was not this sheet metal, and somebody reached their arm through this gate at the same time an open command was given. That shearing action, just as a slide gate, something's got to give, and it's going to be the human body. That's what's going to have to give. That's why that number is there. This is an extremely dangerous part of the gate, and that's why F2200 very, very clearly demonstrates what is acceptable and what isn't. So looking at this vertical pivot gate, they did a great job. This portion they screened. That's the whole portion that goes by this fixed area here, this fence panel. And they went all the way to the top of the gate. I don't know why they didn't quite finish it on the fence, but they just didn't. So A for effort, but overall grade is not quite good enough to have it done. As compared to this job site here, where there is 0, the gate nor the fence panel has any type of less than 2 1/4 inch spacing. That's an accident waiting to happen. I don't know this job site, but I can only imagine. Again, I always think of kids. I get a group of high school kids walking by here, or elementary school kids, and somebody sticks their arm through. That can easily cause death. Someone can get seriously hurt there. And it doesn't take much to greatly minimize the chance of injury there. Just screen it. However you want to screen it, 2 1/4 inches. This portion of the gate all the way out here that doesn't pass by the fence panel doesn't have to be screened. You can have your pickets, whatever you want there, but 2 1/4 here. In addition, just like all other gates, no protrusions. Can't have any protrusions off the bottom of the gate. You can only imagine how if the pickets or something like that came off the bottom of the gate and that was to hit somebody, what kind of potential damage that could do. All the framing members, everything's got to be smooth, no protrusions out the leading edge, anything that come over. If we're going to enter into a receiver guide, it's got to be designed so that it goes into that receiver guide properly. It's stable. Pretty similar to a slide gate, not exactly, but very similar. Certainly the same type of entrapments exist in a vertical pivot that do a slide gate. As we mentioned, there are some other gate types out there. There's vertical lift, which, man, if you ever get to work with one of those, that's awesome. Those are kind of once, maybe twice in a lifetime type gates. We certainly have what we call the overhead pivots, jam track, California gates. Those are the one-piece steel gates that lift up, generally for underground parking in areas that just, I think of, because I come from the San Francisco Bay Area where parking is at a premium. So they do a tremendous amount of underground parking, and there's just no room to put in a slide or a swing gate. So they do a overhead pivot gate. Those have their own unique ASTM requirements. If you ever have a job site and you're unclear, reach out to Zach Ryan. We'll be happy to talk about. There's other types of gates too. We're seeing the folding gates becoming more and more popular. F2200 does not address folding gates as of yet. There's talks to try to do it, but it will come down to, if somebody was to get hurt, did you protect the entrapment zones? And only you the installer, you the designer, can identify the entrapment zones. I can't tell you because I can't see the job. If I'm there at the job, I can see them. But a folding gate is going to be up to you to protect the entrapment zones. That takes us to the end of ASTM F2200. Happy to entertain any questions, comments. How we doing on time? We're just a few minutes over.
We're right on time. Why don't I take over?
Let me stop sharing.
No problem. And we're gonna jump into UL. How's that look?
Good.
Okay. Let me get my screen situated. There we go. Okay. All right, so Tim did a really good job walking through ASTM F2200. I think that the nice thing about ASTM is it's pretty clear. There's not a lot of ambiguity in that document. It's pretty straightforward. And as he mentioned, ASTM and UL work together. They're harmonious. They're separate documents, separate standards. But you also noticed in that ASTM, it called out, hey, if that swing gate comes within 16 inches of a fixed object, okay, but now you're required to protect that under the rules of UL325. So they try to reference each other. And I think the manuals have come a long way. Tim mentioned those manuals a bunch of times, and for good reason. I'm going to do the same thing. That is your guide. If you have an injury and you get pulled into the court, that's the first thing they're going to pull out, right? Hey, did you install it per the manual? Yes or no, right? If that manual said, hey, you got to do this from an ASTM perspective and that from a UL perspective, well, by gosh, you better have done that. So two separate standards looking to work together. All right, underwriters laboratories, you've probably seen UL or heard of UL many times before. It touches a lot of industries. But what is it? It's really it's a nonprofit organization, originally a nonprofit organization. And it tests devices and makes sure that they're safe. You could imagine when, electrical grids started moving throughout the country, in the early 1900s, I suppose, that all of a sudden these devices started being created and built and manufactured to work on those electrical grids. Man, there was somebody that had to jump in here and make sure that those things were safe. So that was where kind of UL was created. It's not a government agency as many would think, although they do work closely with the Consumer Protection Safety Commission, I suppose, to follow guidelines to protect consumers. Now, the industry, as we mentioned, the gate automation industry put that ad hoc committee together to create these standards. Why? Because the last thing we wanted from an industry, for our industry, is for the government to say, man, you're having too many injuries. We're going to decide how you should make these safe. So that was a proactive approach to making sure that these installations are safe and that we minimize the industry injuries and death. Is compliance required? As Tim mentioned, there's no federal law. There are maybe it's only law, to my understanding, in Nevada. But as Tim mentioned, the National Electrical Code is not a law either, but those are set of standards that we're going to be held to. I'm going to bring those that chat line back up. All right. Hey, Kevin, great question. How many deaths in the U.S. in the past 5 years on fallovers? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think there is the Consumer Protection Safety Commission has some stats on gate deaths. I don't know if they get that detailed on how the death occurs.
Yeah, I don't think they get on that. You know, the one thing I will say is deaths have been greatly minimized due to UL and ASTM, greatly minimized. I will say is I know for a fact there was a death in late 2019 on a slide gate that violated just about everything we can do. And poor young man is dead that should not even have been injured, let alone dead, if they had followed just one of these things. But I will say that fallover, just a very quick war story, not too long ago, was on the phone with a tech, helping him troubleshoot a brand new installation slide gate. All of a sudden, he's on his cell phone, I'm on my phone. I heard him scream or somebody scream, a loud clang of metal, and the phone went dead. I called back, couldn't get a hold of him. I called the owner of the company. They called me back later in the day. Well, he didn't have positive stops. He didn't have fallover protection, and his limits weren't set correctly, and he ran the gate, and it ran right off and fell on him and severely injured him. So much so that he no longer is in the automatic gate industry. So just know that even though he didn't die, he was severely injured in a fallover.
And that's an industry professional that knows gates. So.
Thank goodness that wasn't a child walking by.
Good point. Absolutely. So the manufacturers voluntarily submit their products for testing, and where I'd call it out is make sure that the operator is tested to UL325 and not just UL, say 991, an electrical standard, but it is a voluntary testing procedure. And I also might mention that a nonprofit organization, yeah, it is. UL is a nonprofit organization. They also have a for-profit side that does this testing. So it's not certainly not free to the manufacturers. In fact, there's additional testing ongoing that they pay for. Now, there are UL325 standards that are written, and UL helps curate those standards. But other testing labs can also test to those standards. So an ETL or a Met Lab, CSA can test to the UL 325 standards. So there's not a monopoly there for UL. Important to note that if it does pass these tests, it's UL labeled and listed. You often hear terminology UL approved or UL certified. Those are not proper terms. UL doesn't make product recommendations for you. They don't recommend this product over another product. So they simply test it to those standards and label it or list it. Or recognize it. I should add a third there. Okay, so you got to look for the label on that operator that is UL listed to the 325 standards. And it's really our job and our responsibility as designers and installers to ensure that it's labeled, listed, and the installation meets the standards of UL and ASTM. There are operators out there that are being sold today that are not UL 325 listed. Okay. And it's kind of a buyer beware. So they might be UL listed to electrical standard, but not to 325. Okay. And just a little bit of a timeline. Again, I'll point out really two major dates, one being March of 2000, when the significant changes hit the industry. Prior to that, a gate operator manufacturer didn't even have to give you safety inputs, didn't even have to give you a way to make that gate safe. So in 2000, some pretty big standards hit our industry and pointed us in a different direction. In 2016, the requirement for monitored entrapment devices occurred. That was a major change as well. Now those operators don't function normally unless it sees those entrapment devices connected. Unfortunately, that was a reaction to non-compliance, right? We just didn't do a great job of making these gates compliant. So now they're forcing you to at least add 1 or 2 devices to meet the minimum standards. And we'll get into that. And then in 2018, we had some updates on those monitored entrapment devices. Okay. You know, it's not a law. Why do I have to follow this thing? Well, look, it's in the building codes, right? It actually has hit the International Building Code, the Fire Code, and the Residential Code. You might say, well, I'm not getting inspected for it, or even when I do have a job that's inspected, the inspector doesn't know anything about it. There's some truth to that. You know, it takes some time for those standards to filter down to the local level. And it takes some kind of intervention and education for those inspectors to know what to even look for. So the industry is, you know, putting some things together, materials together, and programs together to get those inspectors up to speed on what to look for there. OSHA could require UL325 compliance from time to time, or they definitely require UL compliance for safe workplaces. And as we mentioned, some states require UL325. That would be Nevada. Or licensing. I know in Louisiana, the fire department is kind of running with this one. They're inspecting jobs, and you must be certified, I believe, to install out in Louisiana. I don't know how that project's going exactly, but I know that's the case. And yeah, why limit your liabilities, right? It would take one big issue or one big death or injury to put your company in a tough position financially, potentially, and it's stressful and it takes time away from your business. So let's limit our liabilities. And at the end of the day, let's do the right thing, right? We all have sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and, you know, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas that we care about. So let's just do the right thing. We mentioned the National Electrical Code just as a frame of reference, just to get your mind in the right place. Okay. How do you comply as an installer? Again, from a UL perspective, I'd say everything you need to know should be in that manual. Okay. So they're required by UL to put safety information in the manual. UL even inspects for that. So they read those manuals and make sure that they're written to the UL requirement. Again, you can buy the UL document, but for the most part, everything you need to know about UL should be in there. Okay. It is mandatory, and failure to comply puts us in a bad position. That's probably one of the first questions they're going to ask. Okay. All right. What about old installations? We talked about this in ASTM. You know, can I work on an operator that, say, out of it doesn't meet the UL standards, or, you know, it doesn't have all the entrapment devices? It follows the vintage of the operator. Okay. That's really where you need to get your head right. If it was prior to 2000, well, the standard didn't really say you had to have entrapment protection. Can you work on it? Yeah, you can work on it, repair it, you do whatever you want to it. Technically, you're not in violation. Is it a good idea? Probably not, right? We're now 21 years into this. If it's prior to 2000, it's time to replace that operator. It's time to bring that gate up to ASTM standards. The standard has changed a little bit, as you've seen there in that timeline, right? So whatever the standard was, the vintage of that operator, say it was 2005, well, that's the manual you need to follow, is the 2005 vintage manual. Okay. Do I need to bring all those old jobs up to have monitored devices now? No, it wasn't required at the time of that operator. Okay. And again, if you replace that operator, now you got to bring it up to today's standards. Okay. Yeah, UL doesn't have some UL police out there, right? It's probably frustrating for the dealers that follow these. They have all the extra entrapment devices. They've got the extra screening and mesh and whatnot. You bid your job one way, you lose the job to somebody, you go back to that job and they haven't done any of that. Really frustrating. And hopefully that will change with inspection. You know, there are no UL police. There's no hotline to call. You just is what it is, just a good business decision. Okay. So what are some best practices? Tim mentioned this: develop a checklist, develop a customer sign-off form, perform a final review of the gate installation with the customer. Make sure they understand how the system works, how the entrapment devices function. Include a maintenance testing adjustment of those devices every time you service the gate. Okay. So it's a really good idea to also have a preventative maintenance contract if you can. That way you can make sure that that gate stays safe over time, right? So in review here, that checklist is important. Hey, I showed them how this thing works. I showed them how the safety devices work. You may even say, hey, I showed them how to adjust the entrapment protection, inherent protection devices. And do that final review, have them sign off on that. And the fourth bullet here is really important. If you touch an automatic gate, I don't care if you installed it or not. If you go out to a job you didn't install and you change a wheel on it, you should perform a test on the safety devices before you leave. That's your obligation, just to limit your liabilities, right?
And document that test.
And document that test. It
has to be documented. You would have to prove that if the verbal won't do it. You wrote it down. Yes, I checked the box, whatever it is, but your checklist has to prove that you did that. So make sure you document it.
Take pictures. We live in an age of technology now. There's a lot of good ways to kind of document what you're doing out there. So what happens if a customer asks you to bypass all these entrapment and safety devices? Look, it's not an option, right? It's not an option for the gate operator, installer, or designer. What if they're willing to sign a waiver, right? They are of no practical use. And for these reasons, right? The customer really doesn't understand what's at stake. They don't understand what the liabilities are. And you are the expert, you know what the liabilities are. And courts are going to say, hey, you knew better, okay? In fact, it might be an admission of guilt. You're basically drafting a document that says, I know I'm doing the wrong thing here, but sign off on it. And you can't sign off somebody else's safety, right? Most likely the person that gets hurt in that gate didn't sign that waiver, right? So you can't sign away their rights. So again, waivers, again, no practical use. I'm going to roll through these pretty quick, but there are really, UL breaks these down in 4 different classes of operators. One being your residential, kind of 1 to 4 single family homes. Class 2 is, you know, your gated community commercial. The big bullet point here is servicing the general public, right? And then when you move to class 3, we're no longer servicing the general public. So that'd be more of an industrial site or commercial site where the folks that are using the gate are trained on how to use the gate. Okay. So that's the big delineator, servicing the general public or not. At that point, some of the standards, very few of them, I'll say very few, really one in particular in mind, ease up just a little bit. Okay. The main one I have in mind is the speed of a slide gate, right? On a class 2, we can only go 1 foot per second. On a class 3, we can go faster. And then there's your class 4, and that's restricted access, where it's going to be guarded and monitored. And, it's a high security type application. Okay. And I would say important here is that the AHJ, or the authority having jurisdiction, kind of signs off that, hey, I don't want this safety devices. I'm going to build my gate in a certain way. You can imagine at a jail, they probably don't want a bunch of photo beams and edges everywhere where it could be bypassed. Okay, so you may have you're definitely going to run into those applications where you're a class 4, but just make sure it really is a class 4. I'll bring up an example probably later where it's a police station and they got police cars behind the gate, but it's right on a public sidewalk. I would argue, especially if there's not a guard there, that's maybe not a class 4. So you can't just do whatever you want there. So make sure that AHJ signs off on that and you're very clear about it. Okay, I'm gonna speak to these entrapment zone definitions because it's going to help you understand some of the other requirements that fall in line for UL325. So verbatim, a slide gate entrapment zone is locations between a moving gate and counteropposing edge or surface where entrapment is possible up to 6 feet above grade. Such locations occur if during any point in travel, the gap between the moving gate and fixed counteropposing edges or surfaces is less than 16 inches. So slide gate, sliding past anything within 16 inches, any fixed counterposing edge is going to be an entrapment zone. Okay, similar to a swing gate, it's more or less the same verbiage. If that swing gate swings within 16 inches of any fixed counterposing edges, that's an entrapment zone as well. Okay. All right. Then UL lays out the different types of safety devices. Do you need to remember, an A, B1, B2, C and D? You don't need to remember that. You will if you're taking a certification exam. But just so you know, this is how they break down the different types of safety. So an A is your inherent safety. Almost every operator that I can think of off the top of my head has an inherent entrapment device. And that's going to be some sort of RPM sensor or current sensing type device built into the machine. So that might be one type of safety. A B1 is a non-contact sensor, like a photo beam. They're looking at other technologies to be added in there, but for the most part, a non-contact would be a photo beam. A B2 would be like a contact sensor, like an edge sensor, right? Where you actually have to physically contact it. C is a clutch or pressure relief device, like you might find in hydraulics, or a clutch in an electromechanical. And yeah, important to note that those are swing or barrier only. And then D is basically means constant pressure. It's an actuating device. So if I'm holding that button down and the gate's moving, open or close, I'm holding another button down for open or close, I'm inside of that gate. That is technically an acceptable form of safety. Basically it's saying I'm looking at the gate, I'm holding the button, and if I let go of that button, the gate stops. If someone were to come into a risk of contact of the gate. So A, B1, B2, C, and D, just the different types of safeties that are addressed. And there's a device chart, and you'll see the kind of one difference here is that for swing and vertical barrier arms, they'll accept a clutch or pressure relief device, where other types of gates, they will not accept that type of device. Okay, so to break these down a little bit further, a type A inherent device, it just determines how much force the operator can put on that gate before it's going to reverse. Okay, again, current sensors, RPM sensors, often referred to as reverse sensitivity. It's really that type of sensor the operator manufacturer chooses what type of sensor they're going to utilize. And here's the key point, right? It's not preset. It must be adjusted by the installer, and it must be adjusted every time you visit the site. Why? Well, hardware breaks in or it starts wearing out, and it might need more sensitivity, or you might replace some hardware. Now you got to back it down and have a little bit less sensitivity or more sensitivity, right? So you need to make sure that it's safe every time you go to that site, every time you leave that site. Inherent safety. B1, okay, this is kind of a way to remember, right? That's your first decision. A photo beam or infrared beam. We've got to determine the location. We're given a little bit of guidance on that. We'll show you what that is. But ultimately, with all of these safety devices outside of an inherent, it's up to the installer, the designer, decide where those are going to go, right? Because the manufacturer doesn't know everything about your site. They can't tell you exactly where to place those devices, okay? And in the manual, it will tell you what products have been tested with that operator. It will say, hey, I want this specific manufacturer, maybe even the specific model number. It should say that in the manual. Now, you go back prior to 2018, it might not, or prior to 2016, it might not. It was always kind of in the standard, but for some reason it got missed for a long time. It wasn't being inspected to. But today, every manufacturer must list the compatible safety devices in their manual.
Zach,
Right.
real quick. What if, I'm using brand A gate operator manufacturer, and I really like XYZ photo beam. That's just my go-to photo beam. It works for me. And it works on this operator, but it's not listed as acceptable in the manual.
Great question. So it works just fine. You wouldn't know any different. At the end of the day, it's just you're not following the letter of the law, right? Now, if there was an accident there, and let's say something did fail with that photo beam, you'd be in a position of liability, okay? The manufacturer's trying to protect their interests as well, right? So they want to make sure that the products used with their operators are quality and tested and will withstand the test of time.
One small little rabbit hole. If you're using, I'm talking about a B1, a photo beam. If you're using that for people, pedestrian protection, you have to follow the manual. However, if you have your entrapments for people covered and you decide, no, I really like that XYZ photo beam, it's not listed in the manual, but I'm using it just to pick up cars or detect cars, that's perfectly acceptable.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. So here is a top-down view of a slide gate application. And what it's saying is, hey, you need to mount that beam within 5 inches of the gate panel. Don't believe it's a UL requirement, but it's like just best practice. And if you think about it, it's kind of common sense. The closer I can get that beam to the gate, the better chance I have of picking up an entrapment situation or a pedestrian. And as you might also notice, that it doesn't require a beam on both sides necessarily. Okay, this might cover my entrapment zone for a closed direction, but what if somebody's standing right here and they're not hitting this beam? Somebody could get hurt. Okay, so the closer this beam is to the gate, the better. And the other best practices, they recommend 21 to 27.5 inches off the ground. Do I care about that? Personally, no, I don't. But yeah, you're going to pick up more cars. But from an entrapment perspective, it doesn't really play a whole lot. Most importantly, get that beam as close to the gate as possible. Okay, B2, so that's your contact sensor. So that's where I'm going to come into contact with that sensor like an edge, and it's going to stop and reverse. Again, you've got to determine what products are compatible with your operator, and you need to determine where to locate those edges. Tim mentioned the draw-in post. Can't stress it enough. Don't leave this session without knowing what a draw-in post. Don't leave this session thinking that you don't have to put an edge on that draw-in post. You have to put an edge on that draw-in post every single time. Could you use a beam? I suppose it's not going to work very well. You know, I can't think of many that are made to go vertical. It doesn't, UL doesn't tell you how to solve for this. It just says you need to protect that zone. And it's just really hard to build a slide gate without a drawing post. I can't even think of a scenario where it wouldn't be there. It's possible, I suppose, maybe an overhead, but 99.9% of the time you will have a drawing post and it needs to be protected with an edge. Tim showed filling the gap closest to the roadway between the gate and those fence line or posts. You have to fill the gap. Yes, ASTM says fill the gap. UL says that's an entrapment zone, protect it. And you'll also notice this just typical application using edges all the way around. You've got a leading edge because I've got an entrapment zone right here. You know the definition of an entrapment zone. That's an entrapment zone. I've got a trailing edge. These are pretty common. Does this gate slide within 16 inches of this fence panel? Yeah. It's a counter opposing edge. Yes, I need to protect this area. Is the gate operator an entrapment zone? You know, I think technically it is. I don't know that that gets protected every single time, but technically that could be an entrapment zone as well. Type C, this is just talking a little bit more about a clutch. My call out here is simply make sure that if your operator has a clutch in it, that it's called out as a safety device in the manual. Many operators will have a clutch and it's a sacrificial link, if you will, to protect the equipment should it hit something or reverse a lot. It might have a clutch to slip a little bit so it doesn't do damage to a gearbox. So if it's got a clutch or pressure relief device, just make sure that it is a safety type of device. You know, this is a bit of a shameless plug. I meant to have this one slide earlier, but we do have a new product out there to make life a little bit easier for you. And this is what we call the one edge solution. It's a little challenging these days, right? You've got old operators that use normally open contacts. You've got new operators that have to monitor those edges now. And some of them use 10K resistive method. Some of them use an 8.2K resistive method. So we've built a kit for you. And that kit has all three terminations built in, or I should say in the package. So you assemble this edge, takes about 4 or 5 minutes to put together, and you choose which termination plug you need. The beauty of that is you could throw this edge on the truck. Doesn't matter if you're working on a Saturday, you know that it's going to be, work for your gate application. It's important to note that, as we mentioned earlier, manufacturers call out what has been tested with their product. It's important to follow that, okay? So this edge is for all those manufacturers that call out an ASO Centier model edge as an acceptable form of entrapment. If they call that out, this is a great edge to go with. The other beauty of it is you can cut them down. So if you've got a 6-footer on the truck and you got a 4-foot gate, no problem. You can cut it down, assemble it, and you're rocking and rolling. So just meant to simplify your life and make sure that you've got the right product every time. All right, moving on, type D, that's that constant pressure, press and hold. I'm looking at the gate. I must be line of sight of the gate. If I let go of that button, it stops. I believe the siren also has to go off. So it's not a very practical method for safety, but it is an acceptable form. And where it comes into play more often is, say you've got a photo beam that's knocked out of alignment or something's wrong, you got a bad beam or a bad edge. In some operators, you can override that by holding the button down. It might be on the operator, or it could be an external device that's hardwired. But it's a good way to override that, especially in an emergency situation. Now, you're going to want to make sure that your operator has this function if you're planning to use this as the secondary form of entrapment. Okay, not all operators have that functionality. Okay. All right, so those recent updates are, we mentioned, are basically that for any entrapment zone and any safety device being used for entrapment, that those devices are monitored. And that monitoring means that the operator knows that the device is connected and also knows that the device is working properly. Okay, so kind of lock that into your mind. There's some minimum requirements we're going to talk about, but if it's being used for entrapment, it must be monitored. Okay, so even though you meet these minimum standards, doesn't mean that, let's say I put 2 photo beams, but I have a 3rd or 4th entrapment zone, that device doesn't need to be monitored. It does need to be monitored. Okay. This chart's just showing, hey, for slide gates and swing gates, I need to have 2 independent forms of entrapment per direction, both opening and closing. Okay. So one form most likely would be that inherent sensor. And then we're going to layer on an external form of entrapment. And that might be a photo beam or an edge, right? In both directions. That is your minimum standard. And I can tell you right now, 90% of gate operators, slide gate operators, have at least a 3rd entrapment, right? Because you got leading edge, trailing edge, and draw-in post, right? And maybe more, okay? So that's the minimum standard. For swing gates, they basically say the same thing with one caveat. And that caveat is we want 2 forms in each direction. But if, as Tim showed earlier and illustrated, if it swings open into nothing or it closes into nothing, we'll accept 1, but we got to see at least 1. Okay. And we don't care which direction it is. So I think rather than complicate yourself or complicate what's in your head with that, is most of your swing gates are going to work with 1, just normal operation, but you've got to protect all the entrapment zones. And most swing gates do have an entrapment zone in the open as well. Okay. So additional forms in the open, additional form in the closed for swing and slide. Now, a vertical pivot, again, may not. So we're looking for 2 forms of entrapment, both open and closed, actually, on a vertical pivot. A vertical lift may not have 1 in the open. It may only have 1 in the closing. So that's all laid out in the manual pretty well. There's one exception, and that's barrier arms. If that barrier arm doesn't close or open within 16 inches of any fixed objects, it's not required to have additional forms of entrapment. Okay. All right. This is kind of an exercise, how many entrapment protection devices do you need? I think the industry is getting better about this, and we kind of understand it a lot better. When some of these standards first rolled out, it was racking people's brain. But how many photo eyes do I need? How many gate edges do I need? At the end of the day, it's however many entrapment zones you have. You're going to need 1 for each entrapment zones, and you can choose whether you use a photo beam or an edge. Okay. Yeah, and that inherent sensor is typically one of your 2 independent means per entrapment zone. If your operator didn't have an inherent, you'd have to figure out how to put 2 independent means of entrapment on that drawing post or that leading edge or that trailing edge. Okay. All right, we're going to break this down entrapment zones by the type of gate now. And mainly we're going to focus on slide and swing because that's the time that we've got. Okay. I've read this in definition to you. Again, this is just calling out where those entrapment zones might lie, right? On a slide gate, if that slides within 16 inches of a fixed counter opposing edge, it's an entrapment zone and it needs to have external entrapment protection, really two forms. Hopefully it's got an internal sensor as well. Okay, back to Tim's ASTM slide. This is the gap that needs to be filled between the gate and that fence line or post nearest the roadway. It says fill it, okay? It doesn't say fill it and you're good. A slide gate entrapment zone says that, hey, anything up to 6 feet above grade within 16 inches, a counter opposing edge, I need protection, okay? You're not going to leave this session not knowing what a draw-on post is, right? And that we need to protect it. Again, this slide was from ASTM as well. They did a really nice job here of using contact edges to protect that area. Does that absolve them of requirement to fill the gap? No, we've got to fill that gap as well. And I'm not trying to scare anybody, but we have had many, many slide gates kill people. And it is incredible how strong those operators can be. We've had people pulled in, 6-8 feet before that operator finally stopped. And typically it's a head injury or asphyxiation that gets them at that point. I think Tim mentioned it earlier, like just good design of a system can minimize some of your costs. Here is probably a little bit of a retrofit. So we've got wireless edges on all three of these edges. Perfectly fine. That's a great solution. If you were building this brand new, I would hardwire these edges into the operator. Okay. 2 reasons. Cost, one. The other reason is just reliability. It's a hardwired device. I don't have to worry about a wireless signal or a battery to maintain or a device to fail.
Hey, Zach, real quick, just to build on that, gate edges get a lot of negative press, bad press, and I think most of that comes from RF signals that get blocked or somehow just aren't working. As you said, on that draw-in post, 100 out of 100 times, I'm going to hardwire that in. It is going to work. What's different today about the past is we are now dealing with monitored devices. In the past, if a gate edge didn't work anymore, the gate operator kept working, which was bad and good. It was good, so we had a functioning gate, bad because we lost our safety. With monitors now, that edge is for the open direction. If it doesn't work, that gate's not going to open. You are going to greatly minimize callbacks if you can hardwire that edge on that draw-in post, greatly minimize.
Yep, well said. Swing gates, again, if that swing gate swings within 16 inches of fixed counterposing edge, I've got an entrapment zone. Here's an example. Where are the entrapment zones here? Okay, so take a look at this pretty typical application. Where are the entrapment zones? Well, you may say, hey, I'm going up against the curb here. That's a fixed counterposing edge. I'm coming up against the operator. That's an entrapment zone. It also says exposed operator components on the swing gate entrapment zone. So this arm that comes out, and we have killed people with it. If that swings, can't really tell here, but if that swings within 16 inches of this wall, I've got to protect that area. How am I going to do it? I can use edges. I can use beams. It doesn't say how you need to do it. You get to choose that. And yes, we have killed people on swing gates up against curves. I only know one example, but it has happened. This is always a spirited conversation. Technically, it says it straight away that if that swing gate rises above 4 inches at any point above grade at any point in travel, Now you've got an entrapment zone on the bottom of that gate. Okay. So we're consistent with those numbers, right? 2 1/4, 4, and 16, 4 inches above grade at any point in path. Technically, that is an entrapment zone on the bottom of that gate. And you'd have to figure out how to protect it. Odds are it would be an edge that runs the entire length. You could use a beam if you could figure out a good way to do that. But it is what it is. So Tim, won't spend a ton of time here, but Tim mentioned that 4-inch rule on swing gates. If you're more than 4 inches from the edge of the column to the center point of the hinge, that's an entrapment zone and you need to protect it. Again, most likely it's going to be an edge or contact sensor in there. Ways to design the system to not require it. All right, so entrapment zone review, just pointing out some of the entrapment zones on a slide gate, right? If I slide within 16 inches of a fixed counter-opposing edge, I've got an entrapment zone. Here's a little animation, just talking through this and thinking through this. This is kind of a thought process, especially as a designer, okay? So I've got a slide gate here, top view. The gate's going closed. I put a photo beam here. I'm doing a good job of protecting that closed direction, right? Now I'm going open and I want to use photo beams. I put a photo beam in that stacking area and I'm doing a pretty good job of protecting that open direction. Are there any other entrapment zones here? I know you're all raising your hand right now, but yes, there are. The draw-in post and potentially both sides of that operator, right? Why does this beam not cover the whole area and protect this draw-in post? Because it's only functioning in the closed direction. You got to think about the logic of that operator, right? If the gate's going closed and I hit the beam, it'll open back up. If the gate's going open and I hit that beam, do we want it to stop and reverse close? No, because a car might be shooting through there. Well, they almost always are, right? They're shooting through there. They're going to break that beam when the gate's going open. It probably won't have an effect on that operator. Most logic is not written that way. So even if this beam was on the outside or the unsecured side of the property, we still need to protect this draw-in post with something, okay? Now this beam back here might work in both directions, depends on the operator. So it might protect you both open and close. You just have to check with the manufacturer. Okay, so think through the installation of how many entrapment zones do you need? Here's a swing gate operator. Maybe I'll use an edge to, as a wraparound, works in both directions. Again, check with the manufacturer, make sure that's a valid functionality. I might have that arm here that opens up against the wall or many times goes through the wall or fence line, right? Like you might find a chain link gate or chain link fence line. We've seen that before. I mentioned we had a death not too long ago in Las Vegas or in Nevada. I think it was Vegas. That's what happened. That arm was swinging through I think it was an iron panel, but they'd cut a little hole out for that arm to swing through, and kids were, crawling through that to get in and out of the property. And one of these kids was climbing through it, and his buddy rode his bike over the free exit loop, and it crunched him. So make sure we protect those areas no matter what. This would be a typical excerpt from a manual, right? It's not so specific or prescriptive that it says, this is where you need, or this is how you're going to protect that entrapment zone. It's like, shows you how to identify it and how you might solve that with photo beams. So it's a pretty good representation of where the entrapment zones are right here, potentially across the bottom, and where the gate swings up against the curb or the operator. Okay. On a slide gate, again, it's calling out entrapment zones along here in the stacking area. Okay, No control zone. I would say, we kind of alluded to the fact there were a few things you're not going to leave here without knowing. Tim said, hey, you're going to screen your slide gates to prevent reach through. That's a big one. The draw-in post, we've been harping on that, for an hour and a half now. The draw-in post needs protection. The third is the no control zone. The no control zone says that I'm not allowed to put access controls within 6 feet of any part of that moving gate. I don't care what type of gate it is, swing gate, slide gate, vertical pivot, whatever. No access controls within 6 feet of the moving panel. Again, it's trying to prevent you from, or somebody from reaching through and hitting a service button or reaching through and hitting a key switch to try to get in or out of that gate. That's where a lot of our deaths have occurred. So the no control zone is simply put 6 feet perimeter around that whole, any part of that moving gate, no access controls. Tim mentioned a death a couple years ago. I believe it was Dickey's Arena. I think that's the one you're referencing.
Correct.
Fully grown adult, worked for Dickey's Arena, was a maintenance person for Dickey's Arena, probably used that gate plenty of time. They were in the middle of the night on the perimeter, and there's a key switch on the inside of the property. They needed to get in. Well, they reached through. The guy put this key in, hit it, it sucked him in and killed him. Gate wasn't screened, didn't have the draw-in post protected, and it had violated the no control zone requirement. Okay. So I want you to internalize all of these things. All of these things are important. Those are 3 major things to keep in mind. There's one exception to this, and that's emergency access. We can put emergency access controls in the no control zone. So your Knox switches or your Knox boxes or other types of emergency access devices, those can violate the no control zone. The thought is that those people are smart enough or educated enough on how gates work that they're not going to get themselves tangled up. Obviously,
Exactly.
You should put them in a place that is readily accessible from the perimeter.
Going back to, the no controls, and I think it's, I've made my point on that. That's, to me, the number one thing. Where I still see this violated is more on single family residences, because the homeowner talks the installer or the salesperson to put in what I call the garbage can button or the dog walking button, so they can come and hit a button and they can leave. And the homeowner says, it's just going to be me. Well, I can promise you in no time, that homeowner will tell somebody that he trusts how to get into his gate because they need to get in. Oh, you just reach through, there's a button. Maybe it's the Amazon driver. Maybe it's the mailman. But it gets out. And now what you have is, you thought it was just going to be this one guy who's going to take his garbage out once a week. And, now somebody's trapped in the gate. And it has been proven time and time again. Everything has exceptions. To me, this no control zone is there with 0 exception. You just can't do it. Don't give them a reason to reach the gate. You will not injure someone in that way.
Well said. And here are a couple of those examples, right? Pretty easy to do. Just, throw that keypad up right next to the gate, and that way they can get in and out. But it violates the standard, and it can cause some serious injury. And a couple other examples. Obviously, the top one, we're okay there. No problem. We're greater than 6 feet away. All right, warning signs. Everybody loves this one as well. What the standard says is that these must be installed in the area of the gate. Each one is to be visible by persons located on the side of the gate in which the warning sign is installed. So I need one on the secured side and the unsecured side, and visible. Really, I think, probably a better location, especially on the unsecured side, is probably on a column, because especially on a slide gate, if that slide gate as it opens, well, now I can't see the sign anymore. So just pick and choose where you're going to put that sign. It's got to be mounted on, again, each side and document that you mounted it, right? Put it up, permanently mount it, take pictures of it, because what happens on these residential, really nice residential gates, you know, the resident doesn't want to see it. So they take them down. So the next time you go service that gate, I recommend you put them back up, take a picture of it, document it, and put that in your file.
Have the salespeople of your company tell the homeowner, general contractor, whoever they're dealing with before the installation, their installers will be putting gate signs on. There's, you know, it just helps to be ahead of the game and all this stuff. Just explain, I have to put the signs on. UL says I have to, my insurance company says, but the poor installer, he's getting ready to do the final check off, and this homeowner comes out on this beautiful residential gate and says, what in the heck have you done to my gate? If they knew ahead of time, maybe a lot of this bad vibes would not be there.
Yeah, it's a good call out. Good best practice. Pedestrian gates. Okay. So we make gate operators for vehicle automation. We do not make, I'm not saying we don't make pedestrian gate operators, but most of what we're talking about today is for vehicle automation only. We should not promote any pedestrian traffic through these gate operators. So this standard says is you must provide pedestrian access, and it must be in the vicinity of the gate, and it must promote pedestrian usage. A common misnomer is that there's some sort of specific distance away from that automatic gate that this pedestrian access needs to be. UL doesn't call that out. It does call out that you can't put the person in contact with the automatic gate, right? So provide pedestrian access. It really should be in the vicinity of the gate, and you should promote that pedestrian access. If I've got a gate on the side of a house, will the front door of the house work? Yeah, that'll work. That's pedestrian access. But you might have a compound, right? Everything's fenced in. You've got to provide pedestrian access, and you got to promote that pedestrian access. So on this bottom picture, you'll see, you know, they got a pedestrian gate built into the automatic gate. That's not okay. And you want to take some precautions, right? Is it a good idea to put that pedestrian gate a few feet away from, say, the latch post, if you will? Yeah, it's a good idea. Should I hinge it, you know, so that the handle is further away from the automatic gate? Yeah, it's a good idea. The standard doesn't go that far. Can I put this gate back in this stacking area? No, because that would put me in contact with the automatic gate when I use the pedestrian access. Swinging into public areas, that's a no-no. We want to make sure we're not swinging into public walkways. This would be an example. Unfortunately, this swings out over a sidewalk. In fact, it swings over an ADA mat. That's probably not a good idea. We're asking for trouble there. Also got some ASTM violations here. What about all these other types of gates? Yep, they're all going to have their particular way of adding entrapment devices for from a UL325 perspective. You've got the concept though, right? I mean, if that gate comes down or slides into or swings into, you know, within 16 inches of some fixed counterposing edges, you'd probably be rest assured it's going to require an entrapment device. And in that manual, it will call out where it wants to see those entrapment devices and how many you need. Just unfortunately, we've only got a couple hours here, and I've only got a couple minutes. The rest of this is review. I'm going to keep going through this review here in a second, but what I'm hoping you took away here, if you've got to jump, is we can comply with these standards. It's not impossible. Is it more costly? Yes, it is. If it's designed properly, can I mitigate some of those costs? Yes, you can. Okay. Read the manual, go by the manual, make sure you install per the standard. Okay. We'll provide some additional reference materials and clarity where it may be required. Don't forget to screen those gates, mitigate reach through, protect those draw-in posts. Don't put any access controls within 6 feet of any of your gates. Put those warning signs up. Develop a checklist and develop some best practices for your installers and designers so that they don't have to rethink this every time they go through the process. Educate your customers. Believe it or not, as Tim mentioned earlier or alluded to, more of these folks are interested in having a safe gate than you may realize. Is a property management company interested in limiting the liabilities? Is an HOA interested in limiting their liabilities from an insurance perspective? Oh yeah, you better believe it. Is a company, business that's got a shipping yard or trucking yard or will call area interested in limiting their liabilities? Oh yeah, you better believe it. We live in a litigious society, and they want to, even if it's just from a business perspective, they're going to want to limit those liabilities. As a homeowner, am I going to want my kids, grandkids, dogs to be unsafe in any way at all? No. I mean, that's everybody's worst nightmare, right? That you get a loved one that gets permanently injured or dies from one of these automatic gates. So just talk it through, right? And do it at the quote level, right? Make sure, hey, listen, I'm leaving you with a quote. Here it is. I'm following the industry safety standards. If you're comparing my quote against somebody else, ask them what UL325 is. Ask them what ASTM F2200 is. If they don't have an answer for you, you've got the wrong dealer. Okay, throw the quote out. So those are my, I guess, the best words of wisdom I can offer up. Tim?
No, that's exactly said. As I learn something new in this industry every single day, and the thing I'm learning more is the sooner I can talk to somebody, the better the installation is going to be. If I have the opportunity to talk with the decision makers and explain this, like you said, like, perfect. Ask them about UL ASTM. If they can't talk, if we're in 2021 now, if your competitor can't talk ASTM or UL, they're not even a competitor. This is real stuff. Then the end user, whoever, homeowner, property manager, HOA, commercial place, is going to be a better informed customer, because does that mean you're going to get the job? No, it doesn't. They may be after the almighty dollar, maybe, but I'll bet you'll win more than you'll lose. That's really where we want to be.
Yeah, it's a nice opportunity to be the expert in the region, right? By talking through these safety standards. So here's just calling out some of the guiding industry contributors on the right here. I'd highly recommend you get certified. Everything we talked about today is written in the same language that those certification exams go by, right? We use the same kind of language, same kind of content, same kind of pictures to illustrate it. Tim and I are here to help answer questions long-term. Just shoot us an email, shoot us a text, call us on the phone. Again, we're passionate about the topic, and it seems like every time I talk to you, I learn about something new, or I solidify something in my brain. So I like those conversations. I know Tim does as well. So
absolutely,
reach out to us early and often. I will send out this contact information in the post-webinar notes, and I'm going to take just 5 more minutes. If you've got to jump, not a problem. I'm just going to take 5 more minutes to review a few of these slides. What's wrong with this picture? Potentially the no control zone. Where are the warning signs? Is that picket spacing 2 1/4? Have I protected the draw-in post? No, I haven't done that here. So those would be some call outs for this application. How about this picture? Here's the major one. That tail end of that slide gate needs to be screened as well. It doesn't look like the main gate's screened properly either. Some other potential violations here. Warning signs would be one of them. So, but just to call out, that back frame needs to be filled. This one, we've got our 4-inch rule, right? If that swings up against that column, and we've got a gap more than 4 inches between center line of the hinge and edge of column, that needs protection. This guy, so we've got a ASTM violation on the bottom. We don't have those. We've got protrusions, right, greater than a 1/2 inch. Missing some warning signs here. This one also swings out towards the driveway, so we'd want to make sure we don't swing over a sidewalk or something like that. Here we've got our pedestrian gate built into the slide gate. That's a no-no, right? I just pick on these guys a little bit more. We've got, protrusions at the bottom. This one slides, swings out over a curb. We've got to protect that, and we've got to fix those protrusions.
Hey, Zach, if we could talk on that job site real quick. Go back to the previous picture. We know based on this why they did what they did, that from the inside looking out, that right-hand side gate swings out and it goes over that ramp. Why does it do that? Because there's a police car parked right there and they didn't want to lose that parking space, probably the one next to it as well, right?
Yep.
Because we didn't want to lose a parking space or 2 or 10 does not give us the reason to make an unsafe job site. It just doesn't. It talked about at the very beginning of ASTM balancing safety with security. They didn't balance here. They didn't do a good job. Maybe swing gates weren't the right answer. Maybe they needed to locate these gates in or out more. Maybe they needed to do a vertical pivot. Maybe they could have slid a gate. I don't know. But the answer is, well, I didn't have any other choice. I sure would like to be a fly on the wall when you have to explain that to a prosecuting attorney. Because you are going to be stumbling all over yourself. Well, it'll never get to court. I'll be honest with you. There's so many errors that are done there. If anyone knows these people, I don't mean any fault on them. They're probably the poor installers. They're stuck with what they got to do. This was a design phase problem, not an installation problem. And it could have been mitigated, I bet you.
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because I'll bet you this is how the spec was written. This is how the plans were drawn. Mm-hmm. This is the way the architect wanted it. And it puts the installing dealer in a tough place.
The architect's going to bear very little responsibility for this. The installer is going to take on almost all of it.
And I know this one, they had the police chief's like, no, this is what we're doing. Right. And at the end of the day, somebody gets hurt, the police chief's going to be like, I'm not the pro. I don't build automatic gates for a living. Right. I keep other people safe. Well, that's the world we're living in.
That was all.
Yep. So look, we will filter that information out after the webinar. Give me a day or two. I got to download a video and get that processed, but I'll have that out by end of day tomorrow at the latest, probably today. And if you have any questions, please.
There's one question there that says, will we make this PowerPoint available?
The PowerPoint, I won't make the PowerPoint available because it's not just my content. Okay. But the video will be fully available.
There we go.
And believe me, the links that we provide to those technical data sheets at dasma.com, they'll provide, you can download enough of those technical data sheets probably to fill the gaps.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you on the next session real soon.
Thank you all very much. Zach, we'll catch you.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.